I identified as a prisoner of war. You know, those aren't the words you'd expect from a soldier on a battlefield. They were spoken by the president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, in a Manhattan federal courthouse. It's the start of a story that is just almost unbelievable, and we're going to break down exactly how it all went down.
So, what actually happens when a sitting head of state gets captured and put on trial in a completely different country? Well, we're about to find out. We're going to unpack the capture of Nicolás Maduro, an event with shockwaves that are still rippling from New York to Caracas, and really all across the globe.
All right, so our story kicks off with this absolutely seismic shift. A world leader taken from a seat of power and flown to the United States to face criminal charges. It's a move that has the entire world watching and honestly wondering what in the world comes next. Inside that courtroom, the scene was just surreal. You have President Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, looking calm, pleading not guilty to drug trafficking charges through translators. I mean, just pause and think about that for a second. A sitting president and first lady being processed through the American justice system. But Maduro, he wasn't playing along. Right away, he challenged the court's legitimacy. When the judge asked him to identify himself, he declared he was the abducted leader of Venezuela. So he's framing himself not as a defendant, but as a prisoner of war. And right there, in that first minute, you have two completely different realities crashing into each other in that room. So how on earth did the U.S. explain this extraordinary action? Well, the official story was pretty simple, but it immediately brought up a huge question. Was this really just about law enforcement, or was there a much bigger geopolitical strategy at play here?
And here's where the two stories just completely diverge. The U.S. administration's line was crystal clear. This was a law enforcement operation, not an act of war. But Maduro's argument was just as clear. This was an illegal abduction, a total violation of his immunity as a head of state. This fundamental clash, well, it sets the stage for everything that follows.
But then, President Trump himself kind of threw a wrench into that whole law enforcement narrative. With this one quote, he introduced a really powerful economic motive: total access to Venezuela's oil. That statement completely changed the conversation, suggesting that maybe resources, not just justice, were a key driver of this whole operation. So, as you can probably guess, the reaction to this was immediate and intense. The world, and especially Venezuela itself, was completely split over what had just happened. It was a mix of celebration, condemnation, and just plain confusion.
For many Venezuelan Americans, this was the moment they had been praying for. People like Ana Perez Prince saw it as this incredible moment of hope, a first step toward freedom for a country they felt had been suffering for years. For them, this wasn't just politics. It was long-awaited justice.
But back in Caracas, a totally different story. Instead of celebration, there was fear, uncertainty. You had people lining up at supermarkets, stocking up on supplies, worried about what was going to happen next. And the new acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, she quickly went from defiant speeches to calling for collaboration with the U.S., a clear sign of just how much pressure this new government was under. And that division went straight to the top, right into the heart of Washington. You had Democrats like Senator Mark Warner who were furious, saying there was basically no consultation with Congress and that the whole thing just doesn't pass the smell test. But on the other side, Republicans like Senator John Thune defended the secrecy, arguing that for a hypersensitive mission like this, it was handled the right way. It just goes to show you how controversial this was, even inside the U.S. government.
Okay, to really get what the administration was thinking here, we have to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. See, this move wasn't just about Venezuela. It was part of a much larger and much older foreign policy idea that was being dusted off and brought back to life. So, quick history refresh for you. The Monroe Doctrine. It dates all the way back to 1823, and it was basically America's way of drawing a line in the sand and telling Europe to stay out of its neighborhood, the Western Hemisphere. It's been a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy for centuries.
Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. The Trump administration took this 200-year-old idea and supercharged it. First, they applied it to Venezuela, using it to justify pushing back against influence from Russia, Iran, and Cuba. But then they stretched that same logic all the way up to the Arctic, arguing that Russian and Chinese ships near Greenland were a similar kind of threat in America's extended backyard. And the rest of the world, they're definitely noticing. As Scripps News correspondent Jason Bellini points out, some of America's European allies are looking at this and thinking the U.S. is basically announcing a new world order based on spheres of influence.
The thinking goes, if America claims the Western Hemisphere as its zone, does that mean Russia and China get to claim theirs? It's a move that could seriously shake up global alliances.
So, with Maduro gone, you'd think the problem is solved, right? Well, not exactly. His removal didn't magically fix Venezuela's problems. If anything, it just created a whole new set of incredibly complicated questions about the country's future.
This leaves a massive power vacuum. I mean, who is the legitimate leader now? The U.S. said it was temporarily running the country. But then you have Edmundo Gonzalez, the guy who actually won the 2024 election against Maduro. Shouldn't he be the one to take power, representing the actual will of the Venezuelan people? And that brings up this fundamental debate over America's role. Should the U.S. jump in and actively manage Venezuela's oil and its political transition, like President Trump suggested? Or should it take a step back and just focus on helping them have free and fair elections? There are really strong arguments on both sides of that question. And here's the cold, hard economic reality check. Even with Maduro gone, and even with the U.S. having access to the oil fields, can the industry really recover? Many analysts are warning that unless the entire socialist power structure, which is deeply anti-private property, is dismantled, Venezuela's oil production has almost no chance of a comeback. We're talking about an industry that has already collapsed by more than 70%. So an action that started as law enforcement has led to the trial of a president, a power vacuum in a country, and a potential realignment of global power. It really leaves us with a critical thought. If a line was crossed to bring one leader to justice, where will the new line be drawn for the rest of the world? And maybe more importantly, who gets to be the one to draw it?